Stories of the Bible. The Lost Sheep. This is Jesus,
Heyo!
who is the Son of God and the Savior of the world. While Jesus was on earth, he taught everyone about God's love. He healed many people from their sickness, performed many miracles like calming storms,
Shush.
and even raised people from the dead.
Wahoo!
Jesus taught everyone about God's love. All kinds of people would come to hear Jesus speak, including tax collectors and people who made bad choices. This made the Pharisees and Jewish leaders mad.
Ugh, yuck.
They didn't think that Jesus should be around these kind of people. So Jesus told them this story. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do?
You stay here.
Won't he leave the 99 others and go to search for the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he's found it,
Hey, woo!
he will joyfully carry it home. When he gets home, he will call together his friends and neighbors, saying,
Oh, everyone, come here.
"Celebrate with me, because I have found my lost sheep."
Yeah!
In the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who returns to God than over 99 others who haven't strayed away.
Sure. My name is Colette Soltz, and I'm the pastoral care person here at St. Andrew. So I am an ordained Presbyterian pastor, and I've come to help with the ministry and along with Carl while we are in search of a new pastor for this church. And I've been given some questions from the children of this church, which I so appreciate. What great questions. First, I want to say that first question that you have is about heaven. What does heaven look like? And is it the same for everyone? What a challenging question this is for me, because heaven is my understanding, and what I've read and learned is that it's actually a vision of hope. So I'm going to start with that. Heaven is a vision of hope. And heaven, that concept of heaven, kind of came about really when Jesus stepped on earth. And so our idea of heaven opened itself up when Jesus first became a child and lived amongst us. So we get a snapshot. Someone has described heaven. My guess is the kids have made dot art before, where they've had dots, and then once it's put together, it becomes a picture. So I guess I see heaven as one of those dot pictures, that we get little glimpses of heaven along the way in life. Little glimpses such as a breeze on a hot day. That's another dot of heaven, what heaven is going to be looking like. Or a ray of sunshine in your window on a cold winter day when you know spring is coming. It's just another dot to make this picture of heaven someday. And it will come. That's what we're promised in the Bible, that heaven will come. And we keep getting little dots along the way, glimpses of what heaven will be. When you're sitting with your pet, snuggling with your pet, heaven is also a feeling. So that feeling of love, of comfort, of safety, of goodness, of what is right in the world. When you're sitting on the sofa with your parents and you're all snuggled in, that's another dot of heaven. So we get glimpses, little images, little places that we get to experience heaven. What that picture is going to look like, I don't know. It's kind of like sometimes when you do create a picture, we don't know what it's going to look like in the end, just that we were promised that it will come and it will become something more than we ever can imagine it to be. So as you get little glimpses of heaven, know that that promise will be fulfilled. And that's what the Bible tells us, that it will come. So when you get those glimpses, just remind yourself, oh, this is a little bit of part of heaven. And it will transform all those things that we don't find right in the world, because that's what we're promised, that heaven will make the earth right and good as it was created. So it began as good, and it will become good. That is, who made God? Well, it's what the Bible tells us is that God has revealed God's self as always existing. So it's hard for us to understand God because God has always been there. So God is different from us. We were created, we were made, we were born, and we will die. God will never die. So in that same idea, if we know God will never die, God was never born. God has always been. Before we even became, and after we're gone, God is. And in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, they were afraid, they didn't want to give God a name because that makes it, they wanted to make God real, but at the same time, it also defines God. And God, you can't define God. There is no beginning, there is no end. God always was, and God always will be. And so God even resisted having a name. God said, no, don't give me a name, because then that places me in something. It defines me. And you don't get that impression. But then God said, all right, if you need a name from me, all right, you can give me a name, Abba. So we needed to see God. We needed to have some image of God. And so God gave us Jesus Christ. But in the Old Testament, they gave God a name, even though God really didn't want a name. And some of the early stories of God really resisted that. But God gave us a name for God because we needed it. And same thing with Jesus Christ. God became God for us so that we could have an image of what God might be, just a part of who God is. So there is no beginning to God, and there is no ending to God. God always was. So I read something that miracles, that word is never used in the Bible. It's a word that we've come up with. What is in the Bible that might be in reference to miracles is the word signs and wonders. So even though the word miracle is never used in scriptures, signs and wonders, it signals that God is with us. So how does God make miracles? Someone described it as the gap, that God is in the gaps of our understanding. And so it allows us to see God between science and faith. So it's that gap between what we can prove and what we can never prove. That God is in that space in between, that it can't be proven and yet it's real. It's not just out there. It becomes that gap in between of what we can prove and what we can't. It gives us another dot in heaven. and what that kingdom of God will be. That miracle that is unexplainable. It doesn't make sense. How can this happen? It's not the ordinary. It's not something that we can grasp or understand or even prove by science. So miracles are God in the gaps. So if we go back to the idea that God always was and always is, God, in scriptures it tells us God neither faints or is weary. Because we want to put God in this idea that God is made, if we understand that God's not made, then God can't get tired or weary or sleepy or frustrated with us, and all those things that we do as humans, God isn't. So because God's not human, God doesn't get tired of our mistakes, doesn't get weary. Now, in the scriptures, it describes God as getting weary because we can't imagine any being not getting tired, like our parents getting tired of us not picking up our toys or not eating our vegetables, or we get tired of our dog always nipping at our heels when we told them not to, or our cat sometimes not using the litter box when we've got this great litter box that cleans itself but doesn't use it. We get tired of things, so we can't imagine God not getting tired of us, not maybe being nice to our brother or sister, or not sharing our toys with our friends when, and that's hard for us to understand, this being that never gets tired of us and never gets weary. But we're told in scriptures that God never faints or gets weary or gets tired of us not being good, not being strong, not being kind. This God is pretty remarkable, and it's hard for us to understand, but the Lord is patient towards you, not wishing that any should perish. God wishes upon us such good and wonderful things. That's why God created the world as good. And it's us that we just can't imagine that. But God is never weak or exhausted like us. And that's part of our faith. We just have to trust that God never gets tired or weary. And there's nothing that we can do that God doesn't forgive. So, in the scriptures, we have to understand that the Bible was written by a number of different people. And it wasn't written to begin with, it was told. So it started as stories. And so just imagine if your family came together and started telling stories of their experiences with their father. So say there were 7 kids, and you heard the story of the father or the mother from 7 of the kids. They would all be different because their experiences with that parent was all different. Same person, same image, but they experienced it at different times, because maybe it was an older child and they experienced a much different parent than the younger child. And so all their stories were different. But it's the same story about the same God, but their experiences were all different. but they started as stories because people didn't either know how to write or they didn't have writing utensils. So then imagine those people telling those stories to someone who could write. Then they were written down. Well, after they were written down, somebody else then read them. And how they read them might be different than what that intended person was writing them down, trying to write the story. So they've come through so many different people that we can only try to grasp a small part of that story. When my kids were little, some of them wore the same outfits, some of them wore the same pajamas, and some of them had different ones. Some of them had blankets that they loved. And so to create my kids' story, I took different pieces of fabric that they used or wore or favorite toy, and I made a quilt out of it to tell my kids' story when they were young. So if you think of the Bible as a quilt, it's telling a story. Now, there are different people, the different stories within that same book. So the Bible isn't written by one person, it's written by a lot of different people. And so it doesn't always fit together, and yet it's about the same experience with God. But they all had different experiences. And so they're going to be different colors and written differently. So some of them were poets. Some of them sang, like in the Psalms. Some of them were doctors. Some of them were lawyers. Some of them. So they have different experiences and the different ways of telling the story. Maybe the medical doctor told of all the different things that were medically that they discovered or saw, and then the lawyer talked about different rules and laws. And so there's the stories in there are their experiences with God, but from their perspective. And so there were people who have put the Bible together. I didn't put this together. Someone else put it together, just like the Bible. The people who wrote those stories, who heard them from somebody, put them together. And then in history, things happened. Wars happened, battles happened, and then another group of people decided, well, this Bible, maybe we should rewrite it, taking its original story and put it together a little bit differently. So it would be like if someone took my quilt and added it to a quilt, or rearranged the quilt a little bit. But they would take the same story and make it into, maybe this got worn and there was other things they wanted to add to it, or things that they wanted to modify some. These images would still be there in that Bible, but different people put it together. So it's been put together and re-put together and then put together again. So the Bibles we have today has been put together differently by different people. And so there's also been people who have taken the Bible and said, I don't understand this piece doesn't make sense to me, or this piece, can I rearrange it so it's still together, but I want to be able to see it better or understand it better. So the Bible originally was only read by certain people who could understand that language. And as that language developed and language itself developed, the Bible was rewritten, still trying to be true to the original language, but how can we understand it better? So there's Bibles out there that are now written so that we can understand that original language better. Maybe it tells more of a story and doesn't focus so much upon the exact word, but tells it in a different story. So for instance, there's books out there that were written by authors that are turned into children's stories so that a child can understand them better. That's why there's Bibles out there that are children's Bible, based upon the same original story, but told in a way that you guys can understand a little bit better. So it reads more in a story. And then we add pictures to it because there wasn't pictures in the original Bible. But I like pictures. I like pictures because I like to be able to see things sometimes to help me understand it better. So like the story of David and Goliath, you have to add pictures to sometimes to really make that story come alive. And that's what people have done over time. How do we make the Bible, because if we believe it's a living Bible, how do we make it come alive? So it's not necessarily changing, but how does the Bible live in our life? And that's why the Bible was given to us, and it's been not rewritten, but reinterpreted so that we can understand it better. So we add pictures to it. We try to go back and look at the original languages. What did they mean by that? And so there's been scholars and people who have rewritten based upon the original to help us tell the story better so that we might understand it better. Same stories, just written about a little differently so that we can understand them and that they can give us a better color of what the original story was. So pastors do just what everybody else does. We have dinner with our families. We go on bike rides. What they do at the church is they meet with different people and go to different events of the church, live in the midst of the people in the congregation, but we also live in the community. So we go to meetings, maybe a board meeting at a local maybe with Elks Club or with Masons or with other community groups. We might be in Bible studies at different churches. But we go see our grandparents and our parents. We go swimming in the local pool, go fishing in the lakes. We do what everybody else is doing because we are just regular, normal people. And then on Sunday, you see us up in the pulpit, but hopefully bring in that story of what we've done throughout the week so that we can relate to what we find in the Bible, to how we lived in the regular world and what we've experienced and who we've talked to and who we've been with. So pastors do everything that you guys do, visit people who are sick in the hospital, pray with people, go to Bible studies, youth groups, and just regular meetings in order to help the work of the church be given outside of this place, to move outside of this building out into the community and into the world. That's such a great question, especially now that the Pope is sick. And you feel for those people who are Catholic, how difficult that would be. Presbyterians, we believe that Jesus is the only head of the church and that there is no other human being that's been given a certain divine power, especially over all the churches. We, as Presbyterians, just believe that Jesus is the only pope or priest. That's our pope, that's our priest. And so if we want to know what Jesus believes that we should do, that's why we go to the Bible to find that answer. As Presbyterians, we haven't found anything in the Bible that says that we need a pope or that we need a priest to help us understand scriptures. We understand that there may be churches out there that need a pope to help them interpret, because the early Catholic Church, people weren't able to read. And so they needed the priests and the pope to be able to read the scriptures, because they themselves couldn't read the language that it was written in. So they needed the pope and the priest to say, well, what does this Bible, what does this book say? Because they really couldn't read it. And then over history, people began to learn how to read. The everyday person, not just the people who were in the church, not just those priests, but the everyday person began to read. And it was written in languages that they could read. So because Bibles were originally written in Greek and Hebrew, we don't read Greek and Hebrew. Only those priests and pope could do that. So that's why they could only read those, and then they turned written into Latin. And so, but now that the Bible is written in all different languages out there, we don't need the Pope and the priests to help us read the scriptures anymore. But the Catholic Church kept that tradition. But we as Presbyterians, because we came after the Catholic Church was first formed, we're a branch of the Catholic Church. So we're just a family of that. And that family said, we can read. So, bless you for reading the scriptures back when we needed it, but we don't need for you to read it for us anymore. And there's nothing in the scriptures that say that we need someone else to read it for us. And there's also, we don't need a person to forgive us when we've made a mistake. We don't need someone to go to bless us, because we believe that the scriptures already tell us that we are blessed, and that if we want to be forgiven, we can go directly to God. We don't need another person in order to talk to God. And so we believe we have direct access to God just by our own faith and our belief, because we read about it in the scriptures. And because we can read it ourselves, we know that we don't need another person like the Pope or priest to be able to talk to God. You can do it directly. You just sit down and or walk or do whatever you're doing. You can talk to God anytime, anywhere you want to, and you don't need another person in order to have access to God.